So yesterday, if you weren't here, we were talking about the journey of Siddhartha to Buddhahood, talking about his entrance into the forests, meeting various wonderful teachers, but ultimately not being satisfied with what they were teaching, and then embarking on the path of asceticism, which led him to nearly dying, and then realizing I have to restore my health. I'm going to sit at the foot of this tree until I attain in the great way. And in the Zen tradition, we celebrate that by sitting for 8 days from the 1st of December through the 8th of December to mark that enlightenment period. This retreat is a celebration of that enlightenment of the Buddha. And what we're doing when we're sitting in Zazen is it's what we call a reenactment. It's really a ritual. Zazen itself, meditation, what's known as meditation, is really a reenactment of the enlightenment of the Buddha from the Soto Zen perspective. But it's interesting, and we should know other forms of meditation and what the Buddha taught. And so yesterday I also shared the first 8 exercises of the Anapanasati Sutta, these early teachings of the Buddha that brought people to a place of enlightenment. And we don't necessarily talk in that kind of language in Soto Zen. Soto Zen doesn't use that language of going through a process in order to go through stages, at least the way that I was taught it. We don't go through some kind of stages and now we're here, and rather we're all inherently endowed with Buddha nature, and not only are we endowed with it, but we are it. And Zazen is an affirmation of that. It's not that you have to attain it, and there's no path to it. There's a story of Joshu and, I believe it's Joshu and Nansen, his teacher. And Joshu is asking Nansen, what is the way to the attainment of enlightenment, or the way to practice? Because in Zen we say practice, Dogen says practice and enlightenment are one and the same. So this is kind of a psychological head trip for us. What do you mean practice and enlightenment are the same thing? I thought practice leads to enlightenment. Isn't practice, there's practice and then there's the game, right? Practice leads to the game and then we're ready. But Zen, Soto Zen isn't like that. It's practice itself is equal to enlightenment, and yet we still struggle with understanding what that means. And there's a real problem with this. Every mode of practice in Buddhism has its positive side and negative side. One of the negative sides of this idea that practice and enlightenment are one is that it can easily lead us to complacency. So we have to be very careful about that. We can say, I've attained the goal, I'm just sitting. And then our practice becomes, or our enlightenment becomes complacent, and it's not really that either. So we have to continue to ask ourselves, what is the practice? And this is, Joshu asks his teacher, what is the way, how should I practice? And Nansen responds, ordinary mind is the way. So Joshu, being perceptive like he is, if it was me, I would have just stopped there. I would have been like, oh, ordinary mind, okay, got it. No, but Joshu persists, and he says, well, how do I attain it? How do I get to ordinary mind? Nansen says, if you try to attain it, you'll go directly against it. Well, then how do I know if I'm on the right path or not? He says, it's not a matter of knowing or not knowing. It's not a matter of right or wrong. Right? So that's the dualistic side of the mind, this ordinary mind. So here's the thing, in our popular culture, we equate enlightenment, I think we equate enlightenment with a kind of dopamine hit, right? So you sit in meditation and then you're going to get this like awesome rush, you're going to attain nirvana, right? We have to be careful with the words we use because they're so embedded with meaning that might not be what we're after. And the word nirvana, I mean, when I was growing up, there was a rock band, Nirvana. I really loved it. I loved them. When I grew up, I was like, wow, this is really the bomb. I didn't use that word, but I really liked Nirvana. It'd get me out of that funk that I was in. I was, oh, listen to Nirvana. This guy sounds really awesome. But equated with that term was like a state of mind that's, so we have to be very careful. Like, what is that state of mind? For a teenager, it was like way out of this world. It was a state of mind that was beyond this world. That's how I interpreted that. And I think that's the perception of nirvana. It's a perception of enlightenment that is integrated into our psyche on some level, even if we don't agree with it. We have to be careful because we're hearing this word enlightenment a lot when we study Zen texts. So we need to, again, continue to clarify it. So the antidote to this is ordinary mind, right? It's not a dopamine hit. But the fact that all of us are looking for those dopamine hits points to something that the Buddha was after, and that is that we're suffering in some way. We don't come to practice because we're happy, right? We come to practice because we're in pain in some way, at least initially. And then practice, the scheme of practice, gives us a way to work through that suffering and potentially transform it. That's the promise of Zen practice, is that we can transform our suffering. But only, here's the rub, only if we deal with the suffering. Only if we're willing to acknowledge it, at least at the beginning, right? And that's what Buddha says, the first noble truth. There is suffering. Suffering exists. So let's come to grips with the ways in which we personally suffer. That's one part of it. That's one part of practice, is grappling with the ways that we personally suffer. And that's going to be unique for all of us. Right? I have my own wrestling with my suffering that's baked into with addiction, that is part of my family legacy, something that I inherited. And so I work through that. And I know that's there. I thought, oh, damn it. I thought I was done, right? No, it will, I'm not in charge of that, right? And I have to be vigilant with it. And I'm just saying that to encourage you all to be vigilant with the unique ways in which suffering manifests in your individual body, mind. So one side of this is that suffering exists for us individually in a unique way. But remember, particularly for the Mahayana, the great vehicle, the vehicle that takes all beings across to the other shore of liberation, to the other shore of the end of suffering, right? That's our goal, is not just personal liberation, it's liberation of all beings. That's very broad, that's very vast, but it has us connect with or consider how others in our society are suffering, because their suffering, this is the Buddhist teaching, their suffering is also our suffering. There's not a separation there. It's not that I suffer independently of what's happening to that person or socially as a whole. The sufferings of our society as a whole also affect me personally. And so Buddhism is about, how do I liberate all beings from suffering? And that includes socially. It also includes ecological suffering, right? In the midst of ecological collapse, that's going to affect us personally as well. And so practice, it seems almost overwhelming. I can't do anything about, it seems that we can't do anything about a lot of these situations. Yes, or maybe not. Maybe not. We have to start with ourself, though. We start with the small ring. If you can imagine concentric circles going wider and wider, we start with ourself, and we cultivate the heart of compassion first of all, for our own way of suffering, and deal with that first. Right? Get a grip on your own unique way of how pain manifests. Understand your own psychophysiology in that way. But don't end there. It has to extend out to your family. It has to extend out to your family, your local family, your community, if you have a partner, it's got to extend to that partner. And my teacher said, if you're really practicing, your partner will notice it. They'll notice changes in you before you notice them in yourself. And I remember when I first started practicing, I was in college in my senior year, and I had been meditating pretty regularly, for just short bits of time, but regularly for almost a year. And one of my friends came up to me and he says, "Eric, you seem to have changed." And I was like, wow, he notices something. And then my parents too started to notice change and transformation. So I didn't notice it. I just knew I was in pain, right? And I wanted to drink it to death. I wanted to drug it to death. And other ways of, things I'm ashamed to talk about, but that was the way out of suffering. It was short-term gain, but long-term it didn't do it. It's this with the Buddha, the Siddhartha was wrestling with too. When he went to the forest to meditate and find the way out of suffering, he found several techniques, but ultimately none of them persisted. So he found, okay, I'm going to sit here, and he makes a vow. And this is also a very important piece of the Buddhist path, to make the vow to end suffering. This vow, in the yogic tradition, they call it the sankalpa, but this strong determination to end the suffering of all beings. Right? That's the vow that the Buddha makes. He sits down, I'm going to come to the end of suffering. I make this vow. It's just, there's something about making a vow. And that's why we chant what we call the 4 universal vows. But we have to make these vows personal as well. Right? We say, beings are numberless, I vow to free them. We can do that vow and just, it's rote. And so what happens when it's rote, it gets diluted somehow. And unless you really feel it in your core that, yeah, beings really are suffering, and I want to free them. I want to, that's not going to have meaning to you unless you really feel it. I came to the path of practice through, it was certainly through personal suffering, but then there's also social and ecological suffering that I was being exposed to in a way that never really dawned on me until I took some classes in college on social justice and environmental justice. And then I was like, wow, the extent of suffering that we're experiencing is just profound. How do I deal with that? So we start with self, right? We start with the rung of the self, goes outward to the family. Those are the people that are closest to you, right? If it's your partner, it's your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your progeny that are not even in existence yet. We do this practice for our descendants, the ones that are not here with us yet, the ones that we may never ever meet. We will be dead before they're born. What is it that you desire for them to know? What do you want to transmit to them? Well, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait. You're transmitting it right now. That's the thing. So we're waking up to what we're transmitting. What are we transmitting to the future generations? Right? And that's what we're uncovering. This is what Sesshin is so wonderful, is that we shine a light on that. That's the first step. It's such a difficult thing to do. and we might feel all kinds of difficulties doing it, but it's one of the best things we can do to transmit love and compassion to future generations. You don't have to wait for them to be born. You're doing it already here. And the question is, how do you transmit that right now? How do you transmit it? And you can do it just in sitting, make that vow. I want my progeny, whether it's your direct or indirect, it could be your nephews or your nieces. I want them to know the Buddha's teaching. And it doesn't mean they have to come to the Zen center, right? What is the essence of the Buddha's teaching? I want them to know that they are the entire universe. I want them to know that they are grand, right? In whatever way that takes us. I want them to know that they're magnificent, that they belong. I want them to know that they are loved, right? So that's what we're transmitting. That's what we desire to I desire to transmit that. And that keeps us on the cushion, keeps us sitting, right? Keeps us going. We do this for others, and in doing it for others, we're also affecting our own karma. We're transforming our karma, right? We're changing our outcome. Buddhism is not a path of predestination, right? The future is wide open. We don't know. Right, and tomorrow I'll talk a little bit about the concept of faith in Buddhism. This is very interesting. I'm just enamored with this concept and how it can play into our practice. This idea of faith. What do we put our faith in? We often put it into predestination. That things are going to inevitably turn out a certain way, and oftentimes it's a negative way. Well, the Buddha puts a complete spin on it. Actually, I said we don't believe in predestination, but the Buddha actually, he says in the Lotus Sutra that all of us are predestined to become Buddha. But we don't believe it is the problem. So again, it beckons the question, what do we put our faith in? Can we put in our faith in something as grand as that? All right? We have that choice. We have that option. What we're doing here in Sesshin is we're experiencing the options that are available to us when we're sitting. We're saying, oh, I could continue to think on this way, or I got some options available. So what we're doing is, hopefully you're seeing that you have more options than just this one way that you've always been thinking about things. And that's why beginner's mind is so important to us, right? Letting go of preconceived ideas of what practice is about and returning to the beginning, like seeing in the expert's mind there are few possibilities. Suzuki Roshi says, in the beginner's mind there are many. So always return to your beginner's mind. And man, Nonin was very direct about this. I try to be very gentle with my approach. Nonin was very direct with me when I was a 23-year-old kid sitting zazen and doing sesshin, and I went to him for Dokusan, and I was just deathly afraid of him, but I didn't show it. I was trying to put on this face. And I went into the Dokusan room with him, and he sat face across from me, and he looked at me with this face, and I looked at him and smiled. and he looks at me and goes, "You know nothing. You are a rank beginner." And I was like, okay. I bowed. I exited. But you know what? In that moment, it was very embarrassing to hear that from him, because I wanted an affirmation of my practice. And I was like, I just failed that one. But the thing was, I went back to sit in sesshin, and there was this huge opening. I was actually relieved. Like, on an intellectual head level, that sounded terrible. Like the whole world just caved in. But on a whole body experience level, I was wide open, and it actually benefited me when I came to sit. Again, that's not my approach. I'm never going to do that to anybody else. At least I can't envision myself doing that, and I don't want to do that. And I don't think Nonan intended to do that. I think it was just in the moment. But it was very effective. Yeah, that was just the way it was. So I want to honor him there, since this is the Nebraska Zen Center we're at. I want to honor his spirit and his legacy in affecting many people in a very, very positive way. I mean, we're a testament to that positivity. He, of course, I want to acknowledge he had some difficulties and problems as well, personally and with students too that are there too. But let's put it on the positive. The things that he did were really quite amazing, and this building certainly is a testament to that as well. So here's the Buddha. He's sitting down. He makes this sankalpa. He says, I am not going to move until I wake up completely, with that, whatever that might mean for him. And he has this experience of all kinds of hindrances, right? Mara comes in the form of seduction, comes in the form of rage, comes in the form of delusion. And the Buddha deals with these various hindrances. Greed, hate, and delusion are the primary mental factors that inhibit us from our own awakening, inhibit us from connecting with that which we are, that with our own greatness, right? Greed being that desire to accumulate, whether it's material things or experiences that are pleasurable. Anger is that desire to push away things that are unpleasant, and then there's delusion, which is the underlying hindrance to greed and anger, which is that sense of separation between self and all others, including animals and plants and the great earth and this whole universe. Right? So that's delusion. Those are the three that we're wrestling with. And if you want to titrate it down, like what's the issue that I'm really dealing with? It's one of those three. It's greed, hate, or delusion. I mean, you can go right to delusion and connect with that. Say, oh, this is the way so this is, we try to get, here's the issue though with our practice. Often we're trying to get rid of delusion, but Soto Zen takes a different tact with it. It's a very interesting tact that you can consider. Those that are deluded, let's say, Dogen says something in his Genjo Koan about delusion and awakening right at the start. Maybe somebody can help me out here. Those who are deluded, those who are awakened to their own delusion, how does it go? Are sentient beings. Those who are deluded about their awakening are sentient beings. Those who are awakened to their delusion are Buddhas. Right? Something like that. Those who are awake to their delusion are Buddhas. Right? So rather than trying to get rid of delusion, become aware of the delusion. Delusions, plural. It's usually plural. Right? Become aware of your delusive nature. That's where we're heading. And traditionally, there are 4 or 5 methods for dealing with these hindrances. This comes from the early teachings of the Buddha. The first one, again, you have to connect with which one of these hindrances is most prominent right now. Is it greed? Is it hatred? Is it delusion? Right? Or maybe some, and I would add to this, and this is a very important one for our time, trauma. Trauma is in a class by itself, and so we have to be really sensitive to that too. And I want to address that in a minute, but first let's just work on greed, hate, and delusion. Greed, hate. So there are methods to deal with these hindrances to awakening, and one of them is what the yogis call pratipaksha bhavana. you just love the way that rolls off the tongue? Pratipaksha Bhavana, say that 3 times fast. Replacing the negative with the positive, right? So you're taking whatever, you're doing the opposite. So if greed is very present in your mind at the moment, or in your activity in some way, then counteract that with generosity, a generous spirit. Invoke generosity. Water the seeds of generosity. Make a donation to some group or organization, or say a kind word as a form of generosity to somebody who's standing next to you, or a kind gesture, sincere. That's generosity is a way to counteract the tendency towards greed, towards grasping. And then the hatred is counteracted with compassion, with love. So if you're experiencing anger, then the antidote to anger is that compassion for others in some way, and even in a small way. It could start with yourself. And then delusion. How do we counteract delusion? Right. And that's through wisdom, through the practice of wisdom, prajna. The perfection of wisdom. That's what we chant when we recite the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. We're seeing that there's nothing that's unconnected. Everything's complete. Mitakuye oyasana is that term I shared last night from the Lakota tradition. All my relations, right? It's the acknowledgement that all beings are my brothers and sisters. So even if you can't feel it with your body, just to say it, right? It can be an orienting phrase or a mantra for you to guide your whole being in that direction. Another one, so that's number one, is to replace the bad with the good, right? Do a replacement there. A second one is moral shame. Now this is a very tricky thing to do, because oftentimes we think of shame and we beat ourselves up. But think about it can also be a very positive. Shame can be both positive and negative. It's very, very tricky, so you have to be careful with it, because we don't want to shame ourselves such that we deepen our self-hatred. That's oftentimes when we use that word shame, it's in a negative context, and we say that's no good because it deepens self-hatred, and that's not the direction we want to go. But it can also have a positive aspect to it if you consider, people have used shame in the past to wake up. Say I'm an addict or addicted to something, and I use shame in a positive way to break free of a particular habit, right? Maybe I think, what would an enlightened being think of me doing such and such at this moment? Oh, okay, they think that, okay, I'm not going to do it because I respect that being so much. I'm not going to do it. And that can have a positive effect. If you take it further and then beat yourself up for doing it, that's just going to reinforce a circuit that we don't want. So it's a very tricky one. The third one, but it can be effective, right? Think about that. Right? The Buddha used shame for some of his disciples and helped them to wake up in a positive way. But again, very, very tricky. And if you have questions about how it might work specifically, or you could practice it yourself and see. But you can also bring those kind of questions up in Dokusan. The third one is to put your attention on something else. Simply put your attention. So if you're experiencing problems with greed or hatred, right, maybe to deflect that, put your awareness on something else. And I think one of the most powerful things that we can put our attention on is our physical body, and on sensation in the body. Like just being aware of sensation. It could be the sensation on the back of your hands. It could be the sensation of the bottoms of the feet. It's a very powerful, powerful practice for dealing with mental hindrances like these: greed, hatred, and delusion. Right? How do you connect with different? It could be on your elbows. It could be on the top of your head. right? You can move your awareness around your body, but the thing is, or even just feeling your clothes, the sensation of the clothes against your skin. This is a technique that you can employ when dealing with these hindrances. Okay. Then the fourth one is to actually dig into it. Kind of an acknowledgement, or similar to what Dogen teaches about entering into delusion, right? Digging into delusion, where you instead of distracting yourself from that experience, look at it more closely and see if you can, analyze it. Use your mind now to analyze it and get to the bottom of it. What's this greed about? What's this anger about? And that's where trauma, right, may oftentimes be if you've had personal trauma, a history of trauma in your early childhood, or an event or events that reoccurred earlier that may have caused this. And if you do it in such a way that brings out a sense of compassion for yourself, then that can be a very positive thing. So to look directly at the hindrance. Okay, here's anger. I'm not going to turn away from it. I'm going to face it. I'm going to look at it and try to understand why it's there, and in that way dismantle it. So it could potentially be a positive. But like these things, they're two-edged swords. So if looking at anger just makes you even more angry, that's no good. If looking at lust makes you even more lustful, that's no good, right? We have to do things that open the field of awareness to, it's like dilution. We want to dilute the poison, right? That's what they refer to. Greed, hate, and delusion are poisons, and we want to dilute the poison, not add more poison, to the mind. And we dilute the poison by, the more you put water into it, into a poison, the more it's going to be diluted and thereby rendered ineffective. That's what homeopathic remedy is. It's a poison that's been diluted to such a degree that it's non-existent anymore. But then you take the essence of it is still there, and so you take it in the form of its essence, and then it actually triggers healing. And that's I think that analogy is true for Zen practice too. What we're doing is opening the mind so much. That's why we want to become the whole universe. You open the mind so much that your whole mind and body is this whole universe, and then there's the poison is so dilute, it's non-existent. It's still there, but it's not. It doesn't have that power. All right, so that's the fourth one. And then the fifth one is, and the word for this Dogen uses is big mind, Daishin. Not my Daishin, but big mind or big heart, right? That's the term used in the Tenzo Kyokan, the instructions to the cook, to approach cooking with a big mind. But we can approach Zazen with big mind too. Zen Master Keizan, one of our founders, he says, he gave a gatha for starting Zazen. Abandoning myself to breathing out and letting breathing in naturally fill me. All that is left under the vast sky, an empty cushion, the weight of a flame. Right? So that's another technique we can use to enter into big mind. Right? Then we see, I'm part of this whole thing. It's not just me by myself fighting. And then the fifth one is kind of a tricky one. And in the literature, it talks about you have to become like a strong man, like a bodybuilder type, and you take whatever that hindrance is and you stuff it down, basically. And in the Heart of the Buddha's teaching, Thich Nhat Hanh writes that he thinks that particular method was not what the Buddha taught, that it was added later by somebody else, and it was incorporated as the Buddha's teaching. And if you could try, like really repressing or like consciously suppressing some of these poisons, and see what happens as an experiment, but it's a question whether that's actually a valid technique. So anyways, those are the 5. And so I've mainly talked about this in terms of on the individual level, right? So these are things that we can affect personally for ourselves. These are ways to deal with the mind personally. But that doesn't necessarily absolve the wider family issues that we might be dealing with, unless you really do that work really well, and then you come back to your family, and your family is so grateful that you went to Sesshin, right? They're like, wow, you have changed, you're a much more loving person, I can deal with you better. Then, okay, right on, you're moving in the right direction. If on the other hand you go home and you don't want to interact with your family, and you just rather sit in the corner doing Zazen, then we know that the practice is probably not going in the direction it needs to go. So we want to go in the direction of connectivity with family. I mean, you have to have your own space if you need that, that's you need, but you do it in a way that you communicate with your family such that they find you more pleasant to be around. They want to be around you rather than they want to not, they want to, you want to give them some of that compassion that you develop for yourself here in Sesshin. You want to be able to share that with your family, and you can extend that out to your workplace as well. You can extend that to your dog or your cat, right? Include them in your practice. Include your property. If you have property, include your property there, right? How do I take loving care of what is in my hands to take care of? Or you take, it could be your property, the grounds, but also the material possessions that you have. The cups, the dishes, the knives, the lawnmower, all of those things are sacred items when you come at it from this place of compassion. Starts with yourself and extending outwards to others. This is the Buddha taught, right? And this is what we're doing. The Buddha's saying, may all beings be safe. This is metta practice. That's what we want to do. We want to put it into practice. When somebody else gets us upset or triggers us, again, that's an opportunity for us to start practicing. It's not their fault, especially if they don't have a practice. They haven't come to the practice, and you haven't been able to skillfully show them the practice through verbs, through words. So you got to do it through your own action of, okay, I'm responsible for my own anger. That's me. That's on me. I got to deal with this. But don't beat yourself up if you blow up at your mates or your children. Don't beat yourself up either. You can always say I'm sorry. You can always talk about it later. You can always say, analyze what went wrong. I had to do this just a few days ago. Jisho and I got upset at each other for something that was recurring, and I kind of been trying to deal with it other ways, and it just wasn't working. And finally, it just came to a head, and I got upset with her, and she got upset with me. And Martin was there in the room, and he's watching this, and he says, "Can't I just read quietly? Can't I just read quiet? Can't you guys be quiet so I can read?" I was like, I think back at it now, I just want to give him a big hug and a kiss for saying that. I could never say that. When I was a kid, my parents would argue it, and I thought the house was going to cave in. I thought the world was going to come to an end. I thought they were going to beat each other up. I thought that they were going to get a divorce. I had all those thoughts coming through my head at that time, and thinking, telling them to be quiet so that I could read was not one of my thoughts, in those moments. So I feel like there's been a major, major improvement in my family in that way. Like he had the courage and the confidence to be able to say that, to protect his own sense of enjoyment. Here, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. You guys are really ruining it right now for me. Like he had the boldness to be able to say that. And so I'm like, wow, I could never, I would sometimes feel ashamed if I was doing something that I enjoyed and my parents were arguing. I think, oh, that was just the way that it communicated. Like, how could I have joy when that was something that I felt. And I was also watching my own back. Like I can't talk. I can't approach my mother now because she's upset, and she'll just lay on her anger onto me. So I had to be cautious there. I love my mother. Don't get me wrong, but I would have to be cautious because then I would be in her stream of fiery anger, and she wasn't taking responsibility for it at all. So these are the things that drive us to practice. This is certainly what drove me to practice. So just really focusing on the dysfunctions of our family can be a very huge offering to the world, to the universe. It's a huge offering to the universe if you can focus on those dysfunctions and try to work them out. And so Jisho and I, we were like, you know what, we did this. We really screwed that one up, didn't we? Right? That's acknowledging. All right, we were in delusive mode. Both of us. We acknowledge it. That's what you can expect if somebody's practicing. All right, we screwed up. Let's talk about how we can do this differently. What's the strategy? All right, well, here's the problem. Okay, here's how we're gonna implement some change in our family. And not only did we do that, we also communicated what we were going through to Malcolm, because otherwise he just internalizes that stuff. And we brought it up to him the next day at dinner, and we said, Mom and Dad, we were having an upset time, and we want you to know that we love each other. And Malcolm said, I completely forgot about that already. He did, I'm sure he did, and we could have gone without saying anything, but I really feel like he would have internalized that that's okay to do. And we didn't want him to send that message. Anyways, I'm just sharing this with you guys to hopefully inspire you to not give up on your families and find ways, connect with, take ownership for anger when it comes up. Of course, we don't want to be run over. We don't want to be simply a doormat for people to step all over us. That's not going to be effective either. It might be temporarily. We have to be a doormat temporarily, but we want to work out those things as well as much as possible. But our life is just so fecund for liberation if we don't stop with ourselves, but also connect with our family. If our family's happier, if we can communicate with them, man, your life is going to go so much better. And then it's the sphere of the workplace, right? And other things. And so the last, I'm going to open up a can of worms and just leave that can open here. But two things I want to mention is social issues that also can lead us to the cushion, lead us to practice. And they may be things that we feel we can't do anything about. But I would suggest that we absolutely can do things about social issues, and a lot of it revolves around the kind of language and thoughts that we have. But one thing I want to bring up is race and racism. I know that's a charged word these days, but still, if we take it out of the political stream of events, it's a very, very powerful place to practice. And I will say this openly, my father was explicitly racist growing up. I love my father. He's passed away now, and he's here listening to this. He knows. He was such a racist, and he wouldn't. I don't think he would argue with that point. But we don't like that word racist, especially white folks like us. We don't like that word. We don't like to be told it often, especially if we're more liberally minded. We really resist it if we feel like we're not racist. But for me, it was very obvious. Like racism was right there. And when I'll just tell you a story. When I must have been around 8 or 9 years old. My family was preparing to move from one home to another, and they were still building the house. And I must have been 9 years old because I was 4th grade, summer before 5th grade, or something like that. And there were these 2 African American men there working on the house on a weekend. It was just the 2 of them, and then my parents and my sister and I came to see the progress on the house and where we were going to be moving to. And I remember being in the basement with these two men, and they were doing some stuff, and I can't remember for the life of me what I said to one of the men or both of them, but it was a explicitly racist remark. And the next thing I knew, my parents weren't in the room. They were in another level of the house. I don't even think my sister was there, or maybe she ran away or something. But the guy pinned me up. He lifted me up, pinned me up against the wall, and he was this close to my face. And he was obviously very upset by what I said. And I recognized I had some level of wisdom there as a 9-year-old to recognize that I had insulted him. And in a sense, I was testing my father's theories out. You know, if what he says is true, then what I can say, you know, it wouldn't be hurtful. Again, I can't remember what I had said, but it was obviously very hurtful. And he was hurt, right? I was being hurt by being pinned up against the wall and in a very uncomfortable position, but I could tell that was nothing compared to the way I had verbally hurt him. And something also told me, don't tell on this person. I could have easily gone up to my parents and said, you know, this guy, he just did this to me, and my parents would have been, why did he do that? And I couldn't explain it, as I didn't have the intellectual capacity to explain or even to process what I had experienced there. So I just let it go. And it's only decades later that I could process that. And so we don't have the opportunity often to process the racism that we may have been exposed to, grown up with. Certainly we have family members who are explicit and others that will pretend that they're totally fine. But we need to have the conversations about it to be able to articulate it in a safe environment. And often family is not the safest place to do that. But it's kind of a I would say it's an edge state, right? Bringing up the ways in which we either are complicit in racism or explicit about it. How do we address that with our practice? What are the stems of that? And so then the second thing I want to bring up here is the way in which our country itself was inhabited by, modern United States, the way in which that it was inhabited. The land remembers, just as the building remembers. The building remembers the practice here. When I step into the zendo here, when I step onto the property here, there's a vibe that goes back 50 years, all the way to Katagiri Roshi. That vibe is still present here. Katagiri Roshi, in that sense, is still very much alive here, even though he died in the 1990s, right? His spirit is here, his energy is here. Nonan's energy, certainly, or Kyoki. That's why we say their names. But it's also you and the practitioners that we don't know, that came, at the very start of the Nebraska Zen Center. Their energy is also here with us. So there's a vibe, there's an energy that you feel in a practice place that carries us, that lifts us. So we're not starting from zero here. We're starting from at least a 50-year, and then if you think about Katagiri Roshi and all of his training in Japan, the Japanese culture is also here. We can go back to, and that's why we recite all the names of the Buddhas. We go back to China, we go back to India. They're all with us as well. And when we connect with those people through the recitation, we're being buoyed by all of them in a very positive way. When it comes to the United States, we're also being buoyed by both the positive and the negative aspects of our culture. And we can focus on the positive things in our culture. That might be an approach. But to understand the suffering, we need to also not be too dismissive of the results of both slavery we've had slavery for longer than the country's been around, and the treatment of indigenous peoples, and the land itself. I don't know about Nebraska, but in Iowa, I understand that it's the state of the most changed landscape. It was all prairie, mostly prairie and swamp. The swamps got drained, and the farmland got put there. That's a very violent process to the land itself, not to mention the species that once thrived there. And then also the treatment of indigenous peoples. Again, it's only because I had the opportunity to study this closely with other teachers that I can speak about it with some degree of clarity and not get triggered and stuff. So we have to, again, watch that shame response here, because a lot of times I think part of the issue with us, why we don't deal with it, is because we don't know how to deal with, we're coming at it from a shame approach, and we don't want to deal with the shame that we might be feeling or experiencing on some level. I know for me, I felt a lot of shame when I studied indigenous religions in college, and just got my head around the fact that it wasn't all about the pilgrims and a happy Thanksgiving feast. That was my only thought up until I started reading Native American writers and thinking, oh wow, there's something else going on here. And then working with as a chaplain in training in York, Pennsylvania, one of my supervisors was I believe he was a Methodist minister, but he also was a leader within the Delaware Nation. And he was very, he didn't, I don't know how do you say, he didn't suffer fools. He was very clear about the suffering of indigenous peoples, and he can talk to us about it. And and I'm so glad that I had some awareness and some training with the genocide that took place here, because I was somewhat, I was able to hear his pain. And that's our Zen practice, is to be able to sit with pain. We start with our own pain, and if we're able to hear the pain of others, that's a great benefit. Just that can be, I'm opening up a can of worms here, right? Slavery, genocide. We might not agree with policy, or we might agree with policy, right? It's divided in our country. But one thing that Buddhism teaches is the power of listening to suffering. That's what we do. I don't care if your uncle, it's your racist uncle, listen to his suffering, but also listen to the suffering of people of color, listen to the suffering of indigenous people, listen to the suffering of other species, if you can. That's our practice. And that's how we develop that compassion. That's what the Buddha, I think, that's his goal, right? Beings are numberless. I vow to free them all. I vow to have, that way of compassion for all beings. This is a very, very difficult practice, so we have to keep lighthearted about it. I just raised some heavy points, but we can enjoy. This is the teaching my teacher taught. She got it from Thich Nhat Hanh. You can enjoy your sitting, you can enjoy your breathing, you can enjoy your life, right? Regardless of any of the D words: death, disease, deluge, disaster, all of that stuff, delusion. These things are there. We've got to find ways to transform our suffering into the flower of enlightenment. Thank you.
Thank you, Daishin.